My son said I was slow, old, and a burden. After placing me in a nursing home against my will, he continued to live in my home as if I had died. Nonetheless, I did not become confused. I had more to say. I had other plans, however, and he assumed I would simply leave quietly, something that greeted him every time he entered his house. In this way, I made him deeply regret the day he neglected his mother. My hands bled as I raised my son, but my heart was constantly stretching. Following my husband's death, Jason became my sole companion. My knees hurt after scrubbing floors all day. When money was tight, I forgot to eat. To buy his graduation suit, I had to pawn my wedding band. Plus, I never thanked anyone. When it mattered most, I believed love would return. On Tuesday morning, I passed out in the kitchen without thinking much about it. It is most likely related to blood sugar. I'd been standing too long without eating. Danielle, Jason's wife, appeared worried as they hurried over that evening. He told his mother, "We only want what's best for you," and Danielle nodded as if she had memorized the words. They volunteered to help me finalize my affairs. Jason's expression suggested that I was already halfway there. They brought soup, asked for paperwork, and couldn't stop talking about how difficult housework must be for someone your age. Unbeknownst to me, they had already met with an attorney behind my back. They were quietly informing my neighbors that I was mentally deteriorating, but I had no idea. Danielle had already started changing the locks, but I had no idea. They asked me to lunch again a week later. Apparently, we were the only three. Jason smiled and said, "You need a break." There was silence. Prepare to be spoiled by us. I forgot my bag. I forgot to bring my phone charger. I even skipped wearing my best shoes. They led me to a room with beige walls and fake flowers along the corridor. Jason assured me that the time would be brief. "Get some sleep. The nurse will assist you in becoming comfortable." Then, as if it were his final act, he hugged me tightly. Danielle kissed my cheek, and her lip gloss felt icy against my flesh. After that, they walked out the door. He never returned. Family portraits were missing from the room. This is not a schedule. There are no books. All I have is a bed that I didn't get to choose and one dresser. I asked for a phone from the nurse so that I could contact my son. "Tell them to return during visiting hours," she said. "He just left," I exclaimed. She seemed perplexed. She then handed me the document. Everything was checked, including my name and his signature, a doctor's note. Entrance to a residential facility, current status of observation. He'd betrayed me. Sitting on the edge of that strange bed, I knelt like a churchgoer. Fixated on the ground, I tried to keep my trembling under control. Nonetheless, I trembled. I asked to speak with the administrator at the front desk the next morning. I informed her that something must have gone wrong. It wasn't senile dementia. I didn't intend to die. She gave me the chills, as if I were a ghost pleading for my return. "Do not go out on your own, according to your son. You mentioned having spells of confusion. We received predictions of long-term placement." Screaming was on my mind. Contrary to popular belief, I didn't. I had a feeling that screaming would only validate their point. Following that, I patiently waited. I waited 3 days in that cramped room. I was able to get a phone on the 4th day. I called Jason. There's no stopping there. Here I go again. Once more. Next, I tried Danielle. I blocked it after 1 ring. Walked. The woman who had previously sobbed in my kitchen about the difficulties of marriage had now blocked me. Perched on that arching chair, I looked out the window at a courtyard teeming with people who couldn't remember their own names. It was so bad that people drooled. Some screamed at the air. Some of them looked aimlessly. I wondered, is this the end? What happened after everything I did? I refrained to ensure that he still had a future after everything. Oh, great. I asked the night nurse for a notebook and a pen that night, telling her that I liked keeping a journal was my thing. She retrieved a small spiral from the activities closet and smiled at me. I'm not a poet. My prayers remain unwritten. Here are the facts I wrote. Times of day, business dealings, money accounts, those I met and kept in mind, property that belonged to me, relationships I kept. Despite the fact that I hadn't spoken with Monica Reeves in over 2 years, I remained a client of her law firm. I wrote down every detail as if it were a battle plan, just as it appeared. I understood. No, I wasn't going crazy. Plus, I wasn't dead. The bank account freeze was initiated in the hope that I would be unaware of it. My own utility bills did not include my name, but they assumed I would not notice. They assumed that I was old, I was helpless. But I raised a man. I made it through my marriage. I beat breast cancer. No, even I would be able to get through this. However, I would not simply make it. Of course I'd be back. I would also not request that my keys be returned if I did this. I'd sell the entire house if I could. Additionally, purchase the adjacent one. He went outside every morning thinking he'd won just to see Jason's face. The most reserved lady in the room may be patiently waiting for her moment to shine. And I was on my way. The first attempt to contact Monica Reeves by phone was unsuccessful. I didn't hold it against her. The time had passed. I was able to convey a message, though. A clear, precise, and purposeful choice. Hello, Monica. This is Dolores Mayfield. I have reason to believe that my son deceived people into giving him money by placing me in a facility against my will. The legal documents and joint account are still available to me. Get in touch with me. She returned my call shortly before lunchtime the next day. Mrs. Mayfield spoke in a startled tone. How are you doing? To the extent that a woman can feel safe when her only child confines her in the expectation that she will not retaliate. For a brief moment, she stood still. Give me a rundown. After that, I did. He paid me a visit on Friday. Set out for a 3-hour rainstorm. Bolted through the building's main entrance. In addition, I had her pose as my lawyer to the nurse. Fear gripped the employees. Extremely anxious. My suspicions were confirmed when the manager took her aside and attempted to clarify how they prioritized the client's needs. Monica would have none of it. She entered my room with a briefcase and a determined expression on her face. She told me that after this week, I wouldn't be leaving. We also sue them if they cause us trouble. It felt as if I had taken my first deep breath in weeks. We covered all bases. The papers that Jason falsified. No, I didn't sign the power of attorney. I was the only one whose name appeared on the deed. Jason believed I had disregarded the joint account. Even though I never removed him, he had no idea I still had access. It had been far too long since we had spoken. Did you mention nuclear? What do you think? Monica asked. No, I replied, staring her down in the eyes. The Bible is my guide. He smiled. A revocation is an excellent place to start. Your mental faculties are intact. Your rights remain intact. We begin by depriving him of any legal authority he may believe he has. Monica moved quickly to revoke the forged power of attorney POA in an emergency motion. We included the facility's physician's capacity assessment, who had told me privately that he saw no signs of dementia. We filed a case against Jason because he misrepresented legal documents and exploited the elderly. We also placed a hold on the bank account he used to pay his expensive mortgage. I left the nursing home in the afternoon of a Wednesday. Avoid saying goodbye. Sorry, but no goodbye hugs. Monica bought me a bag of clothes, so all I have to do now is walk slowly out the front door. It's never smelled better to be free. My home was not revisited. I preferred not to. Monica reserved a private suite at an extended stay for the weekend while we discussed our next steps. I had not yet informed Jason of my absence. Nevertheless, he would. Monica filed a partition petition over the weekend. We were within our rights to forcibly remove Jason from the property because he was occupying it without legal ownership, and I had not given him permission to stay. If he still refused to leave, we would take legal action and have the police remove him. Plus, I would receive every penny because I was still the rightful owner. I imagined him and Danielle lounging on my plush sofa, sipping expensive wine and bragging about how they inherited a house from a bewildered elderly woman. They received nothing as an inheritance. Yes, it was stolen. Also, it was about to choke them. Preliminary hearings lasted about a week. We gave them the papers at 7 a.m., fall on Tuesdays. According to an account from Monica's private process server, Danielle screamed. Jason stopped and banged on the door. It was unnecessary for me to be there. I knew enough. My phone beeped that night. The number was unfamiliar to me. I rang it. Again, the phone rang. Next time. At long last, I replied. Dear Mother. Jason spoke in a low, almost childlike voice. Something arrived in our mailbox today. Have you seen this? I stayed silent. You can't be serious, he said. You are about to evict me from my own house. You mean the house you threw me out of? I inquired, collecting my thoughts. He stopped speaking. I never signed any papers, I persisted. I tried erasure account freezing and name forgery. No, this is not correct. I was abandoned at a nursing home without any prior notice. I was deceived, manipulated, and had my rights violated. Well, I must say that I am dead serious, Jason. Mom paid attention. Danielle gave it some thought. I could care less about Danielle's opinion. I brought you up. You let her put me in a box before I was buried. He appeared nervous. Is this really going to happen? I confirmed. Your 30-day notice period is up. I ended the call before he could say anything. My sleep quality that night was the best it had been in several months. Monica and I watched vintage game shows in our hotel room, drinking sparkling cider from paper cups. It was unimpressive. However, I owned it. My choice. This is it. We had a meeting with the buyer the next morning. 2 young Black people just tied the knot, seeking their initial residence. The garden was their favorite. The arched corridor delighted me, glorified the spirit of the establishment. It wants to be filled with love again, the wife explained, running her hand along the kitchen counter. I nodded and gave the signal. Yes, it does. By the end of the day, I had accepted the full cash offer. In less than 2 weeks, we were able to close. Jason stayed silent. Nonetheless, Danielle succeeded. I received a Facebook message from her. The objective: welcome to the family. I am overcome with amazement. Our future was in this. I looked at it for what seemed like an eternity. After that, I typed one sentence. No, those were my bygone days. Also, you laid me to rest in the cemetery far too soon. What happened next was that I blocked her. No, I controlled my tears. A grin eluded me. I calmly took a deep breath while we awaited the big day of the move, because this strategy required one more step from me. Also, I saved the most impressive part for last. When I last went for a stroll around my childhood home, it was almost deserted. The floor where my furniture once stood now only reveals dust shadows. Danielle was also adamant about using the room-to-room oil diffuser, which gave off a subtle lavender aroma. I used to have headaches from those. They had disappeared. Jason did not contest the court-ordered sale. Even the final inspection was overlooked by him. Danielle left a note on the fridge with the words, "You'll regret this," and a box of partially used lotions. However, I had no regrets. Everything was legal and proper throughout the transaction. They were overjoyed, this young couple. It was the house of their dreams, they claimed. Finally, I wished them well and shook their hands. The house I had scrubbed with my bare hands and sacrificed so much for now belonged to someone who would treat it with the dignity it deserved. After Monica asked the big question, I got the sale proceeds in my bank account. Is the second step ready to go? So did I. Yes, I eagerly await the second step. We took our time. That's the secret. Punishment should not be swift. A calm, methodical, and patient approach is necessary. We hung out while Jason and Danielle finished packing up. We waited until word spread throughout the neighborhood. After that, I did something totally unexpected. The home next door was mine to buy. Small, cozy. They had a front rose bush and a back porch that overlooked their kitchen window. The house was one story. It was exactly right. Nothing was owed to me, and I paid in full. Monica did the paperwork. My hand trembled as I signed with the pen. I was about to do it for pure satisfaction, not weakness. Tyler, my grandson, was the only secret I kept. I'm not ready just yet. This moment had to be mine above all else. The day I moved in, I sat on the front steps with a cup of sweet tea wearing my best Sunday hat. Simply sat, at peace, remained silent, observing life as an ordinary grandmother would. Jason got to his feet and went out. He wore a rumpled t-shirt and gym shorts while juggling a phone and a garbage bag. He appeared fatigued. Piff, what a man looks like when he realizes the comfort he's been enjoying all along isn't truly his. He froze when he saw me. So did I. He quickly retreated indoors after turning around. To my surprise, I stayed motionless. The wait time for this view was excessive. Danielle frowned when making eye contact for the next 4 days. She then drew the drapes closer to them. She parked her car on the other side of the driveway. My actions were too brazen for her honor to tolerate. However, I had more work to complete. Along the fence, I began planting roses, vibrant crimson ones that grew like flames. Petty Monica replied. In my opinion, it was a form of nonviolent warfare. I used to sit on my porch every morning and greet the mailman. They paid no attention to the neighbors I was talking to. I made banana bread for the couple who bought my previous house. Later on, I would sneak a peek at Jason through the blinds while he pretended not to notice me. Danielle's vehicle began to leave earlier that morning. She would occasionally disappear for days at a time. For the most part, Jason stayed inside. Automatic lighting begins at 2 a.m., streaming television through the open drapes. I could only guess what they were saying. The time I spent imagining was brief, however. Tyler took a stroll down the sidewalk one afternoon, his backpack slung low. After pausing at the fence, he approached and knocked on my door. I slowly opened it. He mentioned Grandma. "May I have a moment of your time?" I stayed silent. He was allowed in as soon as I opened the screen. We sat side by side on the porch. When he was a little boy and terrified of thunderstorms, I would serve him a glass of chilled tea just as I did then. Initially, he was silent. "I overheard what they did," he said. "I apologize." I stayed silent. I simply looked at him. "He informed me that they discovered you had dementia. I warned you to not go alone. Personally, I don't believe you appear confused." I smiled softly at him. "No, I have never been." He arched his back. "Why did you buy the house next door?" I explained that it was necessary to remind your father. It was something he could see every day from his front porch. This caused Tyler to snort. "Grandma, I was surprised by how cold you were." That had me laughing, an authentic belly laugh. "No, darling, just now I'm going to stop acting as if my silence is due to anyone." That evening, he stayed for dinner. He mentioned that my sweet potatoes were missing. His mother was never good with seasoning. How about their marriage? I did not inquire. No, that was unnecessary. There are storms that are particularly descriptive. Jason arrived at my door first thing in the morning. Unfazed, I continued. I remained seated. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, like a child about to lie down. "Tell me why you are acting this way," he inquired. My tea was enjoyed. "What are you up to, people who call this place home?" "Down the block," beaming down at us. I crouched down. The view was a deciding factor in my purchase of this home. "You are attempting to make me look bad." That was my protest. "Excuse me, Jason, that part is already in the past. That was when you described me as a burden." He averted his gaze. I persisted. "You were raised by me. I was with you through thick and thin. On top of that, you abandoned me in a room full of strangers when I desperately needed help. Said it was merciful. It was named love. It occurred to me, no, I decided to join in. You failed to consider. You seized. You removed. You assumed I'd be cowardly and not resist. You stayed silent." I slowly rose and approached the entrance. "Jason, this is my work. Do not knock unless you intend to regain access." After that, I closed the door. No, I controlled my tears. I did not shudder. Relaxing in my chair, I watched the roses bloom. The views have never been more breathtaking. For some, the act of apologizing brings a sense of closure. That does not add up. When you can sit quietly, knowing that their opinions are no longer relevant, I believe you can finally let go and move on. When you are no longer afraid of their presence, your calmness is so strong that it overcomes their humiliation. These days, I wake up to that kind of silence. The roses bordering my fence had more vibrant blooms. The aroma of cinnamon toast and lemon polish filled my kitchen. I had once again taken up painting, initially on small canvases, color studies alone. The next morning, I painted my childhood home from memory, unless, of course, I put fog in place of windows, because it seemed like that right now, a picturesque location inhabited by visually impaired people. My communications with Jason had ceased. No one has spoken to me on my porch since that morning. I saw him go outside to get the mail or dispose of the garbage. Nonetheless, he gave me not a single glance. Not a problem at all. Reconciliation was not my goal. I hoped that truth would follow him like an enduring shadow. In contrast, Danielle's volume had increased, quite loud and passive-aggressive. She used to host garden parties in her backyard, playing loud music while eating dinner. She hosted wine tastings on her porch, barking at a volume that can be heard over the boundary fence. I overheard her telling the other guests all about me. She appears to be very lonely, you know. She moved next door for no apparent reason. She cannot get enough of us. It's unsettling. She must let it go. We are overjoyed. There is resentment in her. I stayed silent. On one occasion only. Just because you are happy does not mean you should shout it from the rooftops. The next thing I knew, I looked outside on a Sunday morning and saw a for sale sign in their yard. My tea was about to spill. They appeared to have rushed to force it into the ground because it was initially crooked. Jason stood beside it, shoulders hunched and arms crossed. Danielle swung out of her robe a few minutes later and started yelling at him. Her actions were louder than her words, which I couldn't hear. Draw a line. Raise one's voice. Pacing. It was like a matinee for me as I watched from my porch. I won't boast. I do not think so. The storm I had weathered so far was now on its way to the builders. Tyler paid another visit later in the week. His frequency of visits had increased. "I like the quiet here," he explained. "I missed real food," he explained. I couldn't help but notice that he was no longer spending the night at home, but I kept my questions to a minimum. He was 14, stuck between deceitful parents and an irascible grandmother. I invited him to help out in the garden. He got a shovel and gloves from me. He made the remark as he scattered marigold seeds. It sounded like they were going to move. Mom desires to return to Texas. I nodded and gave the signal. Just a moment. How about your dad? He is reluctant to leave. Still, he has no intention of staying here. Why not? Tyler stood in front of me and raised his head to meet mine. He can't help but notice you when he looks outside. I stayed silent. He grinned as he scrubbed away the grime. Later that night, I retrieved the notepad I'd used while in the nursing home. I filled it with my strategy, a record of details such as names and account numbers. On the very last page, I wrote my parting words. It was as if they had put me to rest. They had no idea that I was a seedling. I finally closed it down. The for sale sign was removed 2 weeks later. However, this is unrelated to the sale of the house. The reason is that Danielle has left. She drove away with her mouth shut and her trunk stuffed with boxes. Not a hug. Avoid saying goodbye. She did not notice Jason on the porch. As if she couldn't get away fast enough, she got into her car and drove away. Hours later, Jason was sitting outside, totally by myself, playing silently. The absence of alcohol, completely non-existent. It was just him and the aftermath of everything he'd destroyed. It was on my mind to stop by, make a statement, giving him a taste of what he had withheld from me. Contrary to popular belief, I didn't. His silence was not something I could change. Tyler then knocked on my door. He said she left, never even said goodbye. He was permitted to enter. Cacao powder. As my small jazz radio played softly in the background, I let him sit on the couch and look at the wall. Finally, he admitted, "I don't get it. They had it all." He caught my eye. "No, darling, everything had been stolen. Not to mention that it was created with false information. Nothing can last forever." Slowly, he nodded. "Can I spend the night here?" This was his question. I squinted. "Naturally," I replied. "On demand." He stayed for the entire weekend. In the kitchen, we worked side by side. Served as a card maker. I showed him vintage photographs of his grandfather. Recounted anecdotes that Jason had never bothered to share. He chuckled, had a good laugh. In addition, I noticed something about him that made a small hole in my heart. Goodness remained in him. There is plenty of time to change direction. Perhaps vengeance was not the sole motivation in this story. Perhaps there was a larger purpose at play. Identifying yourself. Something to remember. A love that endures, even when confronted with opposition. That night, while I was putting Tyler to bed in the guest room, he leaned in close to me and whispered something. "Grandma, you're not an inconvenience." Crybaby me grinned. "Babe, I understand. Now I understand." I sat by the window, watching the house next door with the curtains drawn and the porch light on. Currently silent, dim, and empty. I thought, this is the sound of justice. There's no fury. Please be quiet. The hum of a peaceful return has replaced the scream of anguish. It had been 3 weeks since Danielle departed. Across the street, the once bustling house was beginning to look abandoned. Summer get-togethers are over. Wine evenings without squawking are over. They turned off the porch lights. Even during the day, the curtains stayed drawn. The car driven by Jason barely moved. It appeared to have given up trying completely as it sat there collecting pollen. How ironic, isn't it? After all of the commotion and display of wealth, there is now total silence. I caught glimpses of him through the window as he sat on the couch, eyeless and dressed in his signature t-shirt. It was as if the walls were talking to him and he had no way of responding. On other occasions, he would sit on the steps, beer in hand, looking as if he was still trying to figure out how everything had slipped through his fingers. He never looked over at me. He could sense my presence just as I had felt his icy silence while confined in that nursing home, perplexed as to why my lone son had abandoned me as if I were an unnecessary burden. And now he was the only one with it. Tyler and I had almost moved in together by then. He divided his time between home and school. Jason paid it almost no attention. As far as anyone can tell, Tyler said that. Tyler told me one night over baked chicken and cornbread that he no longer cares. Indifferent, he fixes his gaze on the TV, does nothing, not even change channels. I stayed silent. What am I supposed to say? It's difficult to feel sorry for someone who murdered and buried you alive. The boy you adored while singing to him in the rain, however, is difficult to dislike. Love can be intricate in this way. But Tyler was improving. The light returned to his eyes, and his smile widened. He was a great help around the house, assisting with gardening and cooking while also inquiring about his family history. Genuine inquiries. Jason had no interest in answering these questions. On that particular Friday, we donated food to the church pantry. Several of the faces were familiar. A deacon approached me and whispered, "Dolores, we overheard what they did to you. We deeply apologize." People destroy things that God has restored. I just smiled and said that. They nodded, their eyes full of understanding. I could tell they, like everyone else, had been watching from a distance. Everyone in the neighborhood knew. That was the other unspoken aspect of vengeance. It grows. Quiet speaks louder than any amount of shouting. Even Jason remained silent. It echoed throughout the neighborhood like a church bell after a funeral. I left a check at the community center that weekend. I have $10,000. The gift was made in secret. Honors were not my goal. They were starting a new program to reach out to seniors. Someone I know informed me that they were working to make ride-sharing more accessible to elderly people living alone, for the simple reason that I was aware that other family members had treated me as a liability. I was determined not to let anyone else be discarded as easily as I had been. Tyler facilitated the delivery. "You should sign it. Why not?" he asked. "Because the people who need it don't care who gave it. They just need to know someone did." He nodded thoughtfully. That Sunday, Jason came to my porch. I was baking sweet potato pie. The smell must have drawn him out. He stood there for a long time before knocking. I opened the door, wiped my hands on a towel, and waited. He looked different, tired, like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. "I wanted to talk," he said. I stepped outside but didn't invite him in. He looked down at the porch floor. "Danielle's not coming back." I said nothing. I tried to fix things, but everything fell apart. So I said nothing. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy I used to know hiding somewhere behind those broken eyes. "I messed up, Mama." The words fell like bricks. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I don't know. I got scared. I didn't want to lose everything trying to take care of you. "You didn't take care of me," I said quietly but sharply. "You got rid of me." He nodded slowly, guilt swelling behind his eyes. I was wrong. There was, finally. I waited and then said, "And now I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say it." I took a deep breath. "You thought you could bury me, Jason," I said, "but you didn't know what I had left in me. You forgot what I gave up to build that house, to raise you, to keep your lights on, to put food on your table." He looked down again. "I didn't forget," he whispered. I tried to rewrite the ending, and I was wrong." I nodded once, then said, "Tyler is safe with me. He can stay as long as he needs. But you've got some soul searching to do, and you won't do it on this porch." Then I turned and went back inside. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I let the smell of sweet potato pie fill the house, and I set the table for two. Tyler came down the stairs a few minutes later. "Was that him?" I nodded. "What did he say?" "Nothing I haven't already heard in my heart," I said. But it's not my job to carry him anymore. He sat at the table. I'm glad you're my grandma. I smiled. Me too, baby. Me too. Outside, Jason sat on his porch alone again, and I let him, because peace once reclaimed is not something you ever surrender again. You don't always get the ending you thought you wanted. Sometimes you get something better. I never imagined I'd spend the last chapter of my life living next door to my own son after he betrayed me. I never pictured raising my grandson a second time, and I sure never thought peace would come not through reconciliation, but through boundaries. But here I am, still standing, still breathing, still free. Jason never left the neighborhood. He didn't sell the house, even after Danielle packed up her car and disappeared back to Texas. He stayed put. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was shame, or maybe he thought he could fix it by proximity. But I didn't want proximity. I wanted distance. With meaning. He tried a few more times to visit. A wave here, a knock there. But I kept our interactions short, polite, controlled, because I'd already lived through the storm, and I wasn't about to let the wind back in. Tyler had settled into a rhythm at my house. He called it our place now. He started getting better grades again. He even joined a youth gardening club and asked if we could grow tomatoes next season. Of course we could. We could grow whatever we wanted, because no one was going to uproot us again. One morning, I got a certified letter from my lawyer, Monica Reeves. Inside was the final draft of my will. Neatly written, fully notarized, updated to reflect exactly what I wanted. Jason got nothing, not a penny. The house I now lived in willed to Tyler when he turns 21. Until then, a trust fund would cover his education, living expenses, and anything else he needed to find his footing. The rest of my estate, every bit of retirement savings, sale profits, and old insurance money would go to a fund I helped launch through the community center, the Mayfield Legacy Grant. It would help older women in crisis, women discarded by the very children they raised, women who needed just one more hand to pull them back into dignity. I'd already made the first donation, $50,000. I didn't tell Jason about the will. I didn't have to. He found out on his own 2 months later when he asked Monica for a copy of the estate plan just to be informed. She told him with a smile that he wasn't included. He called me that night. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "is this real?" "Yes." "You're cutting me out completely?" "No," I said, "you did that all by yourself. Years ago, when you signed me away like luggage and sold my things before I was even cold." He was silent. I continued, "You didn't just fail me, you erased me. And now you're learning what that feels like. I said I was sorry, and I said I forgave you, but forgiveness doesn't mean inheritance." Then I hung up. That was the last time we spoke. A month later, he moved. Quietly. No U-Haul, no goodbye. Just a faded for sale sign that finally came down after 2 weeks. The neighbors said he left town. Some say he went to Florida. Others say he got laid off and moved in with friends. I don't know, and I don't need to. Because the day he left, I sat on my porch with a cup of jasmine tea, looked out at the quiet streets,